It's like, how do you come up with ideas when you've only got these few things to play with? So we're going from around 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Hey guys, today we're talking about the baby scratch. And the baby scratch is often overlooked, and I think it's kind of perceived by a lot of newer DJs as being pretty easy. You might pick it up and go, okay, that's really simple, I can do that, and then just skip over it. But I think by doing that, we actually leave a lot of learning opportunities on the table, potentially. Without the fader there to distract us, we can really focus in on some core fundamentals, and they're essentially what allow us to add variation to all of our scratches, whatever cut we're doing. This tutorial is split into 2 sections. The first bit is the fundamentals on how to do the baby scratch. So literally just the basic mechanics. Feel free to skip this bit if you know how to do it, but you never know, you might actually pick something up. The second part is going to be the most important part, where I talk about how we can add variation to our baby scratch. So how do we actually baby? I like to mark my records from the needle, and as you can see on the demonstration, that the sample is going from the needle for about 180 degrees. So we're going from around 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock, or 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock, and we have all this sample to play with. The first thing you want to do is basically get comfortable rocking the sample backwards and forwards at the start of the sample. I've actually taught a few people to scratch, and sometimes they struggle with this depending on how experienced they are. Just get used to holding the record and letting the slip mat on platter rotate beneath the record. As with all scratching, we want to make sure we've got a nice slippy slip mat and a deft touch with the record. Try not to push too hard so that the platter slows down. If you've got Technics, this should be easy, but if you've got some less decent turntables, it might slow down depending on how powerful the motor is, but try not to worry about it too much. And it also helps if we've got slightly grippy fingers. This will help stop what's called Q drift, where when you're babying, the Q actually kind of slips forward through time as you're doing it. And this happens because the record's slipping beneath your fingers, basically. So this is why you see a lot of DJs licking their fingers, and they basically do that so that they've got really good grip on the record. How close you have your fingers to the center of the record makes a difference too. It's obviously a fulcrum, and the closer you are to the record, the more movement you're going to get by putting in less effort. Likewise, the further away from the spindle you are, you're going to have to move the record even more, but you probably get a bit more control. So experiment around with that depending on what kind of cut you're doing. I think for stuff like transformers, it might be nice to sort of be on the outside. And for things like scribbles and quick baby scratches and stuff like that, you want to be on the inside. At first, you're probably going to be using your whole arm, but it's probably good practice to use as little movement as you can, just so that it's efficient. And if you're really deft, you can just use mostly just your fingers and get most of the movement out of just doing that. If you've been DJing an amount of time, you probably already do this when you're queuing up a new record. And in fact, this is how Grand Wizard Theodore said that he discovered the scratch.
And my moms came and banged on the door, boom, 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 boom. If you don't cut that music down, you're gonna have to cut it off. So while she was in the doorway, you know, screaming at me, I was still holding the record and rubbing the record back and forth. When she left, I was like,
So I don't really want to go into much more detail than that. As I say, it's actually a pretty basic scratch, and you just got to play with it until you get comfortable. There's plenty of other tutorials which go into detail on how to do it, but the next part of the tutorial is going to be important, because I think that actually often people say, right, this is how you do it, but then they don't go into the detail on how you actually flip it and make it interesting, and what kind of things they're thinking as they're adding this variation. And that's what I'm going to focus on now. So how do we add variation? Like with most scratching, it's actually pretty simple. At its most basic level, on scratching, we've got forwards, right? We've got backwards. We've also got fast on the record, and we've got slow on the record. Faster will give us a higher pitch, and slower will give us a lower pitch. We also have the crossfader to turn things on and off and to add rhythm. I'm not going to talk about that now because I'm focusing on the baby scratch, but it really is as simple as that. But I guess its simplicity is how it can be a bit daunting as well, because it's like, how do you come up with ideas when you've only got these few things to play with? So let's talk about how we can add variation. So the first thing I want to talk about is changing rhythm divisions. The majority of music that DJs play is in 4/4, so I'm just going to focus on that. I'm sure you already do this. If you're a DJ, you probably count along to the beat as you're scratching. You go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, etc. Or you might just count just the beats, like so you might just do 1, 2, 3, 4 over and over again. This can essentially help us with our scratching too. So if we're just going to scratch the baby scratch to the beat, we will count this in our head. If we double this and count in eighth notes, we end up counting it like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and Ricky Rucker calls this overtiming in the Ever, but it's essentially just timing the scratching differently and changing the rhythm division that you're scratching to over the beat. So that sounds like this. We can double that one more time and we can count it in 16th notes, which sounds like this. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E. And that's actually pretty quick. And depending on which beat you're over, you might actually be getting into scribble territory, but more on that in a moment. We can also undertime it, and I'm not really sure how we count this, but let's just, take those same concepts and let's just half the rhythm that we're going at, and it'll sound a bit like this. So literally just bouncing between these can add loads of variation to our scratches. And it's amazing how often you hear DJs, it all just sounds the same. And it's because they're not changing the rhythm division that they're going at. So I'll just want to give a quick note on BPM as well. Obviously, the natural BPM of the beat that you're scratching over is going to play a huge part in the speed that you're going at. Let me give you an example. If you're scratching double time over a 70 BPM beat, you're going to be scratching the same speed as if you're scratching single time over a 140 BPM beat. I hope I'm not getting too basic with all this stuff, but I figure if I don't talk about all this stuff in the baby tutorial, when am I ever going to talk about it? So yeah, I just wanted to mention that too. I also mentioned scribbles earlier, that if you're doing 16th time babies, it can sound a bit like a scribble. And I think there's a bit of a grey area here. It's like, when is a scribble and when is it a baby? Again, it depends on what BPM you're doing it and how fast you're doing it. If you do a fast baby, it's a scribble. If you do a slow baby, it's a drag. But if you do a fast chirp, it doesn't necessarily have a different name. If you have to think about it this way, like in drags, babies and scribbles, I have no problem with that, but it can also be a little bit confusing, I think. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of get that out of the way. I consider scribbles and drags and all that all part of the same baby family. As I mentioned, for babies, we've got forwards, we've got backwards, we've got high pitched, and we've got low pitched. So when I first started scratching, I used to get really confused about whether I should be scratching forwards or backwards. And what I realized is there's literally no right or wrong. And actually the better DJs tend to mix it up more than everyone else. As DJ Dopez told me, he said, that's the jazz part. So just don't be afraid to start on the back part of the record, and in fact you should probably embrace it early on and get used to starting at different points in the sample. You might not even notice the difference when you're first starting, but the better you get, the more intricacies and details you start to hear in your scratching, and you can actually achieve a kind of syncopated sound by starting on the back pull. So I also want to mention that doing babies in isolation this way is actually limiting, and it's kind of harder than when you've got the fader involved, to be honest. Because do you know when you're a kid and you used to scratch on your hoodie, you'd be like you'd always get stuck either down or up, and babying on its own is kind of like that. You baby and then you want to get back to the one position, but you hear the back pull, and it kind of ruins the rhythm and the sound a bit. So just scratching in isolation like this, you're going to have those back pulls, but don't worry about them too much. When we start using the fader, which will be the next tutorial, we can get rid of those really easily. The next thing I want to talk about is pitch. So as I said, we can go fast, which is high pitched, and we can go slow, which is low pitched. Playing around with these really adds variety and especially musicality, because it almost becomes a melodic element at this point. We want to think about it like maybe a really good orator. So when they're talking, they have lows and highs and a bit fast and slow, and they add variation to their pitch essentially. And that's what a good scratcher is going to do as well. You know, that's kind of the flow that we're talking about, isn't it? When you're new and you're only doing the baby, it can actually be really frustrating because it's difficult to hit the pitches that you're trying to do, and you feel like your hand's just jelly and it's not really quite hitting the, you know, the mark. But don't worry about it. It just comes with practice. The more you do, the sooner that you're going to be able to make the sounds that you want. And yeah, it's frustrating, but focusing on it as much as you can and it will pay off in the end. Pauses are an integral part of any musical instrument, and it's as much about what we don't say as what we do say. Without letting our scratching breathe, then it essentially all just starts to sound the same, and there's no contrast, so nothing really stands out. So don't forget to leave pauses, and scratching slowly can really help make your cuts stand out when you go really quickly. Again, it's as much about what you don't say as what you do say. And there's a definite tendency for scratchers to just go mad and put it all out there. Vocal scratching. So I think one of the reasons that people skip over babies is because they're kind of scratching with the R sound, and babies sound really simple when you're using the R sound. You can sort of get around this a bit by scratching vocal samples, and babies start to sound much cooler when you're using these samples. You can drop a baby on the start of each syllable of the phrase. You don't need to use any fader movement at all, and in fact it can be difficult to put any fader movement on it when the syllable is so small. So this is when babies start to become really useful, and I think that's why a lot of DJs like me came back to babies later on and were like, oh, they're actually really useful. I don't need to do a crazy click on this syllable, I can just do a baby and it sounds really cool. Why not practice babies on vocal samples early on and get used to hitting those different markers on the clock essentially. If you listen to old hip-hop scratching, this is a lot of what they're doing most of the time. They're just babying and adding loads of flavor with their pitching, and yeah, they just go through the sample and it sounds cool. Nothing wrong with that. While we're talking about babies, another thing I want to talk about is using them as a transition scratch. And this is not something which I hear many other DJs talking about, but I think transitioning between different combos and scratches is one of the most difficult parts, I guess, of scratching, and it's where you hear the most mistakes being made. It takes some DJs a little while to kind of skip between one kind of rhythm and flow and then move to another one. But using babies as transitions can really help make this easier and sound more seamless. It works on the forwards as well as the backwards. And yeah, it's probably just easier for me to demonstrate this than it is talking about it, and you'll see what I mean. Hey guys, this is me from the future. Finally done this video. It's taken me a long time. Sorry, I've not posted for a little while. I've been sorting out this office and changing up amongst other things. If you're also wondering why I went to baby scratches, I wanted to kind of do it in a bit more of a structured way, like post videos to my channel. So I'm going to start at babies and work my way up. But I'm not gonna lie, I'm getting a little bit sick of doing scratching stuff for the moment, so don't be surprised if you see some other videos, like maybe some tech reviews, but it might also be time for a video essay or two, I think. These take a lot longer for me to make, but they challenge my creative juices, so to speak. So yeah, if you're here at this point, thank you very much for watching. Please join my Discord group. I'll put the link in the description. It's basically just where I keep everyone updated of what I'm doing on the channel and take suggestions. And yeah, it's just like I'm trying to build a community around the channel, and that's the best place to find me. Peace and carrots, y'all.